confirmation.
We're live.
We are welcome. This is Senate Finance. This is Thursday, April 4th. And Julia Victor had a hard stop today at 2 because she's in Ways and Means. I'm going to object to that. We are passing over the Ed Fund, and actually she may have some more information for us. If we wait a few days to get her in. The next item on the agenda, making sure I'm working with the right. Is H61. Okay. H61, which is the parity bill. We have not gotten anyone from DFR since 5 o'clock last night to come in and tell us if they want to continue that bill. But Representative Melissa Black, who is the lead sponsor of the bill, asked if she could come in and talk to us. So, Melissa, the floor is yours. And you know the routine.
I know the routine. So first of all, thank you at the last minute for having me in. I appreciate it. The record Representative Alyssa Black. So I'm on House Healthcare. This is actually a policy or a bill that I've worked on. I was not the reporter of the bill this time, but this is a bill that I've worked on since for the last 4 years. And I think I understand that maybe there might be some questions around it. And I wanted to see if I could just come in and provide some clarification. More importantly, in my role in the legislature, I'm a healthcare administrator. I'm sorry, I have to say I recently left my place of employment after 26 years. But for 26 years, this is what I did. I'm a billing specialist. And I ran a billing department for a large family practice in Chittenden County. So I thought maybe if you had some questions around that, I wanted to explain just a little bit about where we got, why we got to where we got in this bill. So this was an extension, when COVID sort of hit, everything turned on the dime, particularly, in every area of our lives, but in medicine, just in a moment, you could no longer see your patients physically. And, this huge transition was made to telemedicine, telehealth. And I think we learned a lot through that process. And so 2 years ago, we did a bill around telehealth. The difference between what we conventionally think of telehealth is the audio and the visual. Think a HIPAA compliant Zoom.
Yes.
But obviously, one of the things that happened was there is a very small segment of the population, particularly here in Vermont, that just did not have access to that video component. And audio was the only option. So 2 years ago, we did a bill where we made parity around the audio video, and then we left it up to DFR in collaboration with stakeholders to kind of discuss the reimbursement around the audio pieces. So first of all, I want to be really clear about what we're talking about with telephone codes and audio only. I don't want people to think of this as your traditional call your doctor. Hey, I think my kid might have an ear infection, and your kid has had 18 million ear infections, so they just call in an antibiotic. That's not what we're talking about.
Standard call.
Yeah, that's a standard call. Or I'm out of my medication, I need a refill. These are not phone calls where you call and talk to a nurse and the nurse triages you. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about what are considered to be evaluation and management, and that's the term that's used. So all office visits for any provider that you see the main office visit is considered an evaluation and management, is where the provider is evaluating you and then coming up with a treatment plan and managing that plan.
Right, I think some of the concern was when I go in to be evaluated, they weigh me, they take my
Yes.
blood pressure, they take my temperature.
Yeah.
When I'm evaluated on the telephone, those kinds of procedures don't happen.
Actually, not necessarily true.
I know home health has some machines they can put people up to.
Well, I'll sort of describe a telephone only office visit. At this point in time, post COVID, this is really more along the lines of, providers are doing this. Number one, a lot of it is a mental health component.
And
There
that
are,
hasn't been in question.
that has not been in question, but I'll address that a little bit. But imagine if you go in and you have a new diagnosis of hypertension and you're put on a new medication. Typically, what you would do is 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 3 months later, you would come back in and your provider would evaluate you on whether or not the medication that they've put you on is working. Or think about something like diabetes. You go in every single 3 months. So what's happening now is people are actually, a provider will say, I don't need to see you, but why don't you drop by the office and I'll do your hemoglobin A1C for your diabetes or your microalbumin. And then when it's convenient for you and you can't get in here, I'll have your lab result and we can do a visit via telehealth or in some cases, audio only. The other thing is when you do these visits, there is a component of vitals because most people can take vitals themselves now. Anyone who has hypertension, the recommendation is that you have a home blood pressure cuff. And patients will take their blood pressure every single day with the same cuff in the same position. And they will call in, or sometimes they mail in the mail, because I can remember opening hundreds of envelopes that just have blood pressure readings and the times and the days for the patient, gets scanned into the person's medical record. So there are vitals, and the provider usually asks, can you please weigh yourself? Weigh yourself today. What did you weigh yesterday? What did you weigh the day before? So there are certain vitals. But the important part is that providers are having to work under standards of care. If you're a provider, you would never do an audio only visit for something that you know you need to lay eyes on that patient. That is not good care, and that is not a standard of care. That's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking about very certain circumstances and very certain conditions that providers really don't need to lay eyes on a patient. So I just want to be clear about that. The other thing that I want to make the point about is that there are very specific CPT, current procedural codes, CPT codes, that are what these telephone visits are. They are for the evaluation and management of established patients, so a patient that's established with you. And they are strictly time-based codes. They're not based on anything like medical decision-making or anything like that. It is a time-based code. It is actually in the language of the code that, the differing codes are, for instance, 5 to 10 minutes of medical discussion, which means you need to be on the phone with that patient for 5 to 10 minutes and discussing, having a medical discussion. And it can only be billed by providers that can bill other evaluation and management services. They can't be billed by your nurse or anything like that.
Before COVID, Were phone calls paid for?
Uh. I'm going to say it was payer specific. And it was not consistent. And I will tell you from my experience over 26 years, the reimbursement rates were so pitifully low on them that they were not done. Providers just can't afford to provide services that they're not going to get paid for, as much as they would like to. The point I wanted to make is that because these codes are time-based codes, if you're on the phone for 20 minutes with your patient to follow up with them on their depression,
It's a mental health.
that's a mental health. If you're on the phone with your patient for 20 minutes discussing their COPD, hypertension, and diabetes, we're saying that that is less value than if you're discussing their depression. A provider's time is worth the same amount regardless of what their expertise that they're discussing is. You would never go to a lawyer and a lawyer bill you for an hour at one rate because you talked about one thing and a different rate because you talked about something else. Their time is of value. And from someone who has scheduled tens of thousands of visits and has been responsible for making certain that the lights are kept on, because that's how thin the margins are. A provider has a schedule with slots in it. These visits, audio, visual, in person, they are a set amount of time in that provider's schedule. And if you are a provider who is struggling to get by, I can guarantee you that you are going to fill that slot with a visit that is going to reimburse you for the time that it takes you to do it. You're not going to fill it with something where someone says, we don't think it's of as much value. This is a very, very tiny percentage of telehealth. I believe Medicaid, because Medicaid pays 100% for all visits. The word de minimis comes up, but the difference is de minimis. But if you're a provider, you're going to stop scheduling those audio visits. You will never have a provider come and sit at this table and tell you, well, I'm just not going to see patients. But when you're trying to keep your practice open so that you can see the 10,000 patients you have assigned to you, you've really got to make hard choices about who you're seeing and who you're giving your time to. And providers are just going to stop offering this service. And then it becomes an equity issue because there is a very small segment that is not comfortable using the technology of audio, video, and are just more comfortable on the phone. And they're not going to have that option. And that's why in the House, we made the determination that no, a provider's time is worth a provider's time, and it doesn't matter what they're doing during that time. And so it's on par. I also really want to make the point, because I know that there's concerns about, that we as legislators in statute should not be like setting rates. We're not setting a rate. We're setting parity, and we certainly have other examples of doing that. I mean, we have parity in mental health versus physical health. We have said that your copay cannot be more if you're seeing a mental health provider than if you're seeing a physical health provider. We have said that those are on par. And we're not setting the rate. The rates are set by the insurance companies, and that's what the rate is.
So I support the bill and it's helpful and, I think it does help us to really get into some of the details, so this is more of a curiosity, but you talked about different scenarios where someone might take their own vitals versus come in to get their vitals done and then have their separate management evaluation meeting. Would those be different codes anyway, so that if you come in to get your vitals, that is a code that gets put in, but if you take your own vitals, that doesn't get added to the code?
So no, it wouldn't be a separate visit, and, you know, the codes for these telephone visits are very, very specific. So I'm gonna read for you, it's a telephone evaluation and management service by a physician or other qualified healthcare professional, so that's like a nurse practitioner or physician assistant. And management services provided to an established patient, parent, or guardian, not originating from a related E&M within service provided within the previous 7 days. So if you had say you were in the office and then 6 days later you had an audio, you cannot bill for that audio only because it is related to an evaluation and management that you had in the office. And also, these codes make it so that you can't be on the phone with somebody and say, oh, I think I really want to see you in the office.
Yeah.
And then make them come in. You don't get to bill them both
Mm-hmm.
because they're related to each other.
Mm-hmm.
So what you would do in that sort of circumstance, and this happens a lot. You know, most doctor's offices have in office CLIA waived lab work that they do. You know, your glucose, your cholesterol, your hemoglobin A1C for your diabetes. And often what they will do is they will say, drop by the office when you're running down to Trader Joe's on Wednesday with your son who brings you once a week. They'll stop in the office, they'll have that blood work done. You cannot bill for, and then they will take somebody's blood pressure. They may weigh them. That will be documented for this future visit that's going to happen.
So it gets put under the
It
same
gets
code.
all put under the same code, you can't bill both.
Yeah.
And you also can't, if you come into an office and you just see like an MA who takes your blood pressure and your weight, you don't get to bill for that. So there's no billing for that. It just sort of becomes inclusive in this other visit.
Committee, any other questions? All right, yes.
How much control does the patient have over whether this is?
Patient has complete and total control. So in statute, there is a very long waiver where a person can, you know, the provider has to give this informed consent, and it's a very long informed consent. I can offer you this service. I feel as though your condition that I'm seeing you for is something that is conducive to this service. They have to explain if there are any limitations on offering it in this modality. The patient has to give complete consent. They have to know that they're being billed for it, and they have to consent to being billed for it at the equivalent level. And if the patient says, no, I want to be seen in office, no, I want to be seen, you know, through an audio and visual, then that is the final word. The patient chooses whether or not to receive this service. And the provider at the same point can say, no, I don't want to see you for this, because there's a lot of patients who are like, can I just call you? And the provider's like, no, I need to see you. I gotta lay eyes on you.
I'm thinking in part just from personal experience. I have a blood pressure cuff, a history of high blood pressure, maintained very nicely, actually, with medication. But I find taking my own blood pressure is such a frustrating experience that it elevates my blood pressure.
You have white coat syndrome.
Well, no, so when I'm doing it myself,
Like the opposite, yeah.
You just wear a different.
I want the white-
You're giving yourself
Well,
white
I mean,
coat syndrome.
I'll take it, it tells me I'm dead. It says I have no blood pressure, then I take it again, it's like 200 over that, that's not that bad. And I just, by the time I finally get a reading, it's a reading on me really agitated, so. So I prefer to be in the doctor's office, that's someone who knows what they're doing.
Absolutely, and you would say, and I'll tell you what, your provider would ask you, give me your last 3 blood pressure readings, and he would look at it and he would say, yeah, no, you need to come in the
Yeah.
office, we need to take your blood pressure for you.
Yeah.
And you would simply say, I'm more comfortable coming in the office, and that is your choice. Okay?
Committee, I'm gonna have to move this along because we started late
Yes.
and the tax commissioner is hanging on the phone question. So, any final questions? If not, do we still want to have DFR come over and tell us? That I'm sure they don't want to keep doing this. But as soon as we get DFR over, I'm gonna put this on for a vote. We're gonna have to get this, and if we don't.
Stop
make
it.
it, and then no, this has been that we're now coming out of COVID. We do, I think, have to extend the sunsets. But the sticking point seems to be the comfort level in setting the reimbursement, not the rate, but the parity. So
Is the question on the table repealing the sunsets or extending them?
I think it's repealing.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. And that's for telemedicine, so for this will expire. And I think in July, this one
Yeah.
expires, and then the telemedicine, I think, is June. Okay. Thank you,
Thank you again for having me in.
yes.
Yeah, so even though I had to go upstairs and then I can come back later. The thing that I heard that was new, that's helpful to me, it's not rate setting, it's policy definition. Rates are happening elsewhere.
Yeah, the rates are set, this is parity between telephone only and audio visual or in person. Okay, next, if he's still with us, we had, Commissioner Bolio, I hope he's still there, he is still here with us. And Commissioner, I guess, not sure where we're gonna start. We had hoped to have Julia Richter in here before you, but we had a couple questions. First, I think yesterday we had a fairly emotional meeting with a couple of town listers. And I think a lot of legislators are a little hesitant to upset their listers, so have we got any plan for maybe doing some fence mending, trying to reach out to them? I think the bill is going to work in their interest, but it'd probably go down better if we at least reached out to them sometime. So, Jill, have you got any thoughts on?
Sure, this is Jill Remick. I'm the Director of Property Valuation Review. That was a little tough to hear, but I'm not entirely surprised. As I said, I actually attend every monthly VALA meeting and have for years. I'm emailing with all of them pretty regularly, or phone calls. So we're all very much in regular communication. I do know this particular topic seems to be pretty emotionally concerning for these folks. I would like to just reassure everyone, the state is certainly not trying to reduce municipal or education fund revenue. Quite the contrary, we're trying to create a equitable, fair, statewide, predictable, and up to fair market value valuation methodology. I agree. I do think this would be in the town's benefit. My hope would certainly be that they would be pleased with the outcome and happy to use those numbers. So I definitely will continue to reach out and work with VALA, work with particular assessors. I think, and I accept responsibility. I think there was also some misunderstanding about what was and was not required. That delineation of just the transmission and distribution piece specifically, I think was causing some confusion and concern. That the generation facilities are not required. We do come up with all of those values as we are already required to statutorily. But the towns can use their own numbers for those, and that would continue for the immediate future. That is not what this bill addresses either. So yeah, I learned some good lessons yesterday from that testimony, and I will continue to work with those folks and try to be more clear. I know they mentioned that we've been meeting with the utilities. We met with the utilities to collect the data so that our consultant Brian Fogg could actually see what was reasonable to collect from the utilities. And that was really beneficial because some of the municipal and co-op utilities do not collect their data or report their data the same way that maybe a Velco or a Green Mountain Power does. So that actually informed us so we can change our methodology for municipal and co-op utilities. So it was purely to get the information to make sure that our methodology was using data that could be collected. But I can understand why that would sound like it was some sort of different meeting. And I've already been in touch with Brian Fogg, who's going to create an updated explanation for me to provide to towns, and we will host a conversation with the towns to explain his methodology in person with them. Thank you.
Do you have a question?
I thought there might be like two possible changes to the language. I mean, I'm not looking to overcomplicate things, but they seem to have this concern that it could be a slippery slope to mandatory outside evaluation of their other generation and, other kind of related property. And I wonder if it makes sense to put something in that makes it clear that discrete property that's not shared by another municipality or sort of doesn't leave their jurisdiction is not included. And then secondly, it just seemed like they wanted some level of consultation to be built in before the final value. And it sounds like that is happening informally, but it might, if there was a way to codify that, it might also make them
Could you say that, might increase his workload, but that any town could consult with our lister, if they have a question about the appraisal?
Absolutely. I think it's important to remember too, you folks heard from 2 towns that happen to have generation facilities yesterday. There's almost 2,000 utility entities across the state in different municipalities. And the vast majority of towns already use the values we provide. There's lots of reasons for that. In some towns, the education funds collected are more than their municipal. So it's actually can be harmful or seen as harmful for towns to spend money hiring an outside consultant to value these and then defending them legally because the state, the education fund is benefiting from that. So I do think that, you folks heard from one segment of the population. The vast majority of towns use our values already. And I do think it's also important to remember what we do in Vermont right now, doing this at the local level is another one of those quirky Vermont things. It is definitely not the norm or standard across the country. And it is a significant dollar amount on the grand list. And so I do think the state has an interest in making sure those are high. And frankly, the idea was definitely also to save the towns the cost of the litigation and paying assessors to come up with these values. So we hired someone who is well known in this space and he would certainly be happy to talk with towns. If the towns have any concerns or questions about the values he comes up with, we would certainly want to facilitate that conversation, especially since the methodology is relatively new and untested. So it's very much, we really do want to collaborate and make sure folks are happy with this, and hopefully it can give folks a lot of peace of mind, regardless of the outcome of this particular language.
Can we do anything about the oath? I mean, right now they include their assessors in the oath. That's an oath opinion. How do they know they're any better than our appraisers?
Yeah, I think the oath is essentially a formality, and frankly, there's lots of other valuations for properties that are already either dictated You know, there might be a formula and statute that's already setting what the value is. There are exemptions that are statewide exemptions. There's treatment of certain properties that fall under certain categories. So that surprised me a bit. We can certainly look at the Lister oath. It's an oath that folks take in the statute, and I appreciate that they take that oath seriously. I did want to clear up, though, that if the state was setting the utility values and those values were required, then the state would not be adjudicating those values, as was sort of implied yesterday. We do have PVR hearing officers who hear appeals that go beyond the Board of Civil Authority. But for something like this, those would go to Superior Court. They would not come to PVR to get analyzed, but we would
Okay,
participate
But
in defending them.
who would be responsible for the legal costs? If the appraisal is appeal, if it's the state's appraisal, wouldn't the state have to defend its appraisal, not the town?
We would, if the town wants us to, which I think they would, very similar to what we already do now with the hydros. The hydro dams, the state is available and has funds to help towns defend those. Some ask for that help, some don't. Some work in partnership with the AG's office and our appraiser, and some don't. But yes, we would absolutely have to take responsibility for that, especially if it was required.
Senator Burke.
Thanks for coming back. So I'm wondering, thanks, Commissioner, for sending me the Department of Tax 2021 Utility and High Value Commercial Property Recommendations per Act 73, Section 21 report.
Rolled right off the tongue, Senator.
I don't know if everyone in the committee got it. This came out of a conversation in the hallway yesterday, that there was a report, and I thought it might be useful for people on the committee to see.
See, yeah, so where do we get it?
We chatted in the hall and the commissioner sent it.
Oh, okay, well, if you said it today,
I'll send it to
you
Jane.
can get it printed out for us. We are going to have to recess, I think. We have the city manager and town clerk from Barry zooming in at 3:45. We're behind. But
Can I ask them one
Yes.
question?
Yeah.
So there's three options in the report in proposals around changing, three proposals in there about valuations, including the utility one. Have any of the other two been advanced? You know, I'm just wondering if this is one of several, and some have already been acted on, and this one's still sort of outstanding.
Yes, thank you for asking. I'm happy to say that, yes, they have. We did get an appropriation and two positions for the Commercial Assistance and Litigation Program. So this will be an attorney and a commercial appraisal expert on our team who would be available to towns if they would like for any kind of these high value and unique commercial properties. So that was option one. And then, as we discussed a bit yesterday, the mechanism for reimbursing the towns under section 5412 of Title 32 was increased by the legislature to 1 million from 100. Now, we don't always use that 1 million, I want to be clear. And if more than 1 million is needed, it's prorated. But that is also significant because what we were having to do was prorate the $100,000. And when we had a couple of very high dollar settlements or cases, then the towns were still not going, those easily could eat up that $100,000. So, yeah, the other two, the option 1 and 2 have come to fruition. Yes, sir.
Okay, and the complex valuations like a methane digester that's unique even amongst methane digesters, is that something you've helped on? Or you support a municipality in hiring their own?
Yeah, that's what we would like to do. We haven't actually contracted with anyone yet for that. We're just standing up the program this year. So for that particular one, I think there's one in Salisbury. I was gonna say Shrewsbury, Salisbury. They did do that on their own. That town did do that. Now, that was prior to this language being passed, and now we are available if they're interested in supporting that.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
okay, I don't see, are they,
Madam Chair,
Carol Dawes is on.
Carol is on, okay,
briefly before we go,
Yes.
on this whole thing with the listers.
yeah.
I've received communications, I'm sure other members of the committee have, that are so accusing and insulting that I find it very difficult to follow the argument. I do think they perhaps have legitimate growth. And I hope we will hear from them again,
Again,
addressing themselves solely to the issues. If they believe that there's all sorts of nefarious plotting and insincerity on the part of my colleagues, personally, they're wrong. And I don't need to deal with that. It's not my job to dig through that kind of garbage to get at the real issue. Okay, so, but I don't know if maybe they're right. And I cannot give their arguments a fair consideration at this point because it's so, the way they presented is so distasteful. So I would hope that the listeners would take another crack at it. Stick to the topic, stick to the issue, and let us know why you don't like the bill.
okay. Now, your opinion, I assume. Okay. Commissioner, I feel bad that we've had you here. I wanted to give you a chance to talk about their tax proposals in the home bill. And we also wanted to talk about a schedule for a tax on second homes. So perhaps we could reschedule.
I'm happy to come back whenever, Madam Chair. I've got both those topics ready to go.
Okay, we will set you up again.
If I could, one quick comment on this issue too, Madam Chair. One thing I heard yesterday was concern that perhaps the tax department would be giving some kind of sweetheart deal to the utilities if the values were required from the tax department. I would encourage the committee to speak with those utilities about what the impact to their taxes will be from our methodology change. From our chair, we expect in aggregate these values to be going up. The amount that they go up vary company by company, but in aggregate, this will be a property tax increase for this segment of the industry, and in some cases significant. So this is not a sweetheart deal with the new methodology. They will be seeing increased values in aggregate and therefore increased property taxes.
There seemed to be an idea that you just took what the utilities told you in the past and put that on. As I understand it, this is a much more active evaluation process because the towns are doing it. I have heard in the hall that, and we'll see if we can get the utilities to come in on the record and tell us exactly what they anticipate happening, but the word I've heard is they do anticipate an increase, but the fact that they don't have 52 different sets of evaluations to deal with, you know, makes a difference to them, so.
That's right. It's a savings for taxpayers, for ratepayers, for towns, for the state on that front. And rather put more money into the education fund than into litigation fees.
Okay, I would too. All right, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, thank you for putting up with our schedule. Okay, we have Nicholas Sterling Castro and Carol Dawes. And the proposal is any abatements through the 15th of this month, flood-related abatements. And this is something we could put on miscellaneous tax, but just need to hear from the towns as to what's happening on your front. So who wants to talk first?
Carol
I'll go.
does.
Yeah. Nicholas was told to just point at me, so.
I figured that was gonna be the order, but
For the record, Carol Dawes, I'm the Barry City Clerk and Treasurer. And that means that I'm also Clerk and Treasurer for our Board of Abatement. And we have been very busy with abatement hearings since the flood. To date, we've heard 57. We've got 5 more scheduled for next week. We continue to receive requests. At the moment, the total amount of abatements that we have approved is something in the neighborhood of $125,000. About half of that is education related. And our real concern, I mean, obviously that's a lot of money, and about half of it affecting the municipal budget is a big impact, particularly along with the non-reimbursable flood-related expenses that we've had to absorb in the current year. But our biggest concern is that we don't believe that we have heard from everybody who's going to be making a request for an abatement. And with the April 15th deadline fast approaching, with the cutoff for making requests for reimbursement of the education portion of abatements, we're really concerned that we're going to miss people. We have 135 properties on our substantial damage list. We have 53 properties on our potential buyout list. Not all of those people have come forward yet to have an abatement hearing. In spite of our numerous attempts to reach people, we sent abatement notices out with every tax bill back in September. We have sent letters individually targeted to people on the substantial damage list and to people in the most heavily impacted neighborhoods. Our assessors are literally going door to door and leaving notes on properties that appear to have been affected. And we have properties that have been abandoned and walked away from, and we're not able to contact the owners of record. We're afraid that what's going to happen is that when new tax bills come out this summer and they realize that they're still paying taxes on a $150,000 home when it's been severely damaged, that is when we're going to start the next wave of abatement hearings. And by that point in time, we will have been past the deadline for reimbursement of education, the education portion. And we have to pay it to the school whether we collect it or not. So it's kind of a double hit to the municipalities. So our hope is that we can have an extension of that deadline. We certainly appreciate what the legislature approved earlier in the session. And we got notification actually from Jill Remick earlier this week that the application process has now opened up. And I look forward to getting those in a timely manner. But we know that there's more coming down the pike.
Okay, what kind of extension would work?
Well, as I mentioned, I'm thinking that the next wave will probably come after our new tax bills go out, which will be the latter part of July, early part of August. So if we had an extension to the end of 2024, I would think that that would be very helpful. I know there have been some proposals looking for maybe a year extension. That also would be helpful. But I would think at least through the end of calendar 2024 would make a big difference.
Okay, Senator Robinson.
Carolyn and Nicholas, I don't oppose this at all. I'm just curious, in case I missed it, is their valuation going to go down based on a view of their damaged property? So they'll just be getting less of a tax bill, but you're still worried it won't get paid.
Yes, and our assessors are working off of the abatement lists, working off the substantial damage list. They're working off of all those lists to make the adjustments for the new tax bills. And certainly a lot of that will be captured and reflected in the new bills. The problem is that we don't know every property that was impacted. Not every property was in the north end, the area that was most heavily affected. I got an abatement request the other day from a property that was nowhere near the north end. It's the south end of town, but they are substantially damaged and certainly entitled to an abatement. At the moment, they're uninhabitable. And those properties don't automatically spring to mind when the assessors are out doing their work. So we really need to continue to our outreach efforts. And I really do think that when those tax bills land in people's mailboxes, that will have an impact. The bills that went out in September, people were still shell-shocked. at that point in time.
Okay, but we went through this yesterday. I don't think you were here, Aisha. This is abating last year's 23's taxes. Because the flood damage was then. This year, their appraisal should reflect the flood damage. Because it's the condition of the house on April 1st. So this year, they're getting this year's taxes abated. That should be reflected in the value. We're only abating last year's.
Actually, Madam Chair, the abatement period we're working with right now are the tax bills that went out last September that cover the period of time through this coming June. So it's from July 23 through June 24. And the new tax bills that will come out after July 1 of this year, hopefully, most of them will reflect the change in value.
Yes.
Okay, I think I was here, but I'm glad I can clarify that still. So there's no request for abatement looking forward.
No, this is only for last year's flood damage for damage that occurred between, and I believe we've got dates.
Okay.
July 10th through August
Okay.
something.
But they could have missed, the lister could have missed property that's damaged that was not visible, et cetera, and they might request a tax abatement for for 2023.
They could request for both 2020, the tax year 2023, which is what we're in right now.
Yeah.
And if they, say they had substantial damage, and it hasn't come to light to us until the new tax bills go out for tax year 24. So they're being assessed at the pre-flood values. They could request abatement based on flood damage for the new tax bills that come out in July.
Okay, but the abatement would take the form of a reduction in their value.
Right. And well, it would take the form in, because the value will have already been set and the tax bill had already been sent out. And all the calculations have gone into figuring out what the tax rate is for the budget based on the assessments that are on the records. It becomes an abatement, which means the city has to give back money.
Right.
And has to make the ed fund whole.
Got
Yes,
it. Okay.
because we're just doing for last year.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Sterling Castro, do you want to tune in at all?
I echo everything Carol said. And, I think the only piece to one of the questions that was asked that, we have had the assessors go out. We've had the assessors send letters to every house that's in the floodplain of Berry City. We put out, we do a monthly one-page update from the city of Berry in the Times-Argus newspaper. We included in there a notice to, please contact the assessors. And even despite those efforts, we've only gotten a handful of people who've made appointments with our assessors to get their houses inspected. And so I think Carol mentioned a number of reasons why an extension would be helpful. One of them, we're seeing it on the ground of the people directly impacted still not coming forward. Many of them may be doing so because they're afraid, they're living in perhaps substandard conditions. They're afraid of having people come into their home at this point. So that was really the only piece I would add, that, of that effort to get the assessors out, only a handful of residents have responded. And so we're, I think the extension would be helpful for many reasons, but that's another one that just the outreach hasn't resulted in people walking or taking us up on these offers.
Okay. I know we're running out of time, but I think you all just sent a letter supporting the property tax freeze for blighted properties. It's part of my curiosity about what the long-term plan is, what you've learned from other flood impacted places around the state and the country, and how we can be helpful in helping you rebuild or not have blighted properties sitting on your streets, on your brand list.
Yeah, it's a tremendous challenge right now. I think the reason we were compelled to support that proposal and the council was compelled to support it was because we just need to have, we have some potential projects. We just need to have different abilities to get those across the finish line with different mechanisms. And so this just happens to be another mechanism to perhaps entice a development. And so it's helpful for us to be able to rely on that if it matches a potential project. Right now, we're pulling all stops. We've listed 5 city-owned properties we've listed them for sale. We've been asking for letters of interest to redevelop them into housing. We have one proposal now from the first one we listed, which is a parking lot on Seminary Street. We have a proposal from DEW Down Street in Evernorth to put up 28 to 30 units. So we're very interested about that. We've put the second property we listed was Wabi Park on the north end, which many of you who toured with us have seen. That's the parking lot right adjacent to the public safety building. I think if we'd listed a playground. We listed a playground to sale for redevelopment on July 9th last year that, probably would have run me out of town. But those are the kinds of things that we have to do now because we are in desperate need of housing for, as Carol mentioned, for the numerous people who've submitted buyout requests, the numerous houses that are substantially damaged. And so literally everything's on the table. We have clusters of homes that have requested buyouts on the north end where we've looked at the map, the satellite versions of these maps, and we could fit, we think, units of, 2 buildings with 6 units each. And so our challenge for that particular project is we can't do FEMA buyouts for that. And, FEMA buyouts have this really rigid line of they become forever green, forever undevelopable. And for Barry, that is just a challenge. So one of our issues to move a lot of these projects forward is we'd love to buy people out to get them out of these homes that get repeatedly flooded. We just can't do it with FEMA because that puts that land off limits forever, right? So those are the kinds of things we're struggling with where, as I mentioned, we're putting every piece of property that the city owns that could have a building up for sale. And I think what'll really be helpful for us moving forward is having resources to do non-FEMA buyouts, because that's going to both provide relief to the people who keep getting repeatedly flooded and help us rebuild in areas where we can safely rebuild up to flood standards, which we know can happen because, I like to give the example that in the Vine Street neighborhood, Vine Street Park was devastated. The several houses around that park were devastated, including your colleague, Peter Anthony's. But the guy who does our FEMA program, our FEMA application, FEMA employee lives right on that same block. His house is slightly elevated, no problems, right? And so we know we can safely rebuild in the floodplain, and that's what we'd love to do. We just need resources to buy these people out that are non-FEMA buyouts.
Okay, perhaps we could consider extending the freeze for flood impacted communities.
We can consider
Yeah.
what all the freeze is.
Yeah, as drafted, the proposal
Yeah.
doesn't capture Berry City's north end, which is where it would be most helpful to be able to use that tool, particularly in that north end neighborhood that I've walked with so many of you, which is North Main Street, Beckley, and then and First through Sixth. So that part of the city is not captured by any of those designations, and that's where it could really make a difference for a potential developer.
Okay, thank you. That is good information to know. All right, think we will at least get the abatement extended. I haven't heard any objections, so I intend we'll get something drafted and put it in the miscellaneous tax bill. It will be the next to the last bill. If we raise any taxes, it'll probably get vetoed, so I'm trying to find another place to put it. It has been suggested that we have tabled your TIF district. And I don't know if we took that TIF district bill off and used it for something else, if that would impact anything you were planning to do on the TIF. I know this was, it seems longer ago than last year that you would plan to do parking, and that since remote work had happened, that was not your top priority and you were working on another one, but that's been suggested as a vehicle. But let me know if it's gonna do more harm than good. Okay,
It's hard. We would love them all, but we certainly understand that that there needs to be prioritization. And I'm happy to come back anytime and talk about the TIF stuff. That's my baby. So
okay, well, if we decide to use that as a vehicle, we'll definitely talk to you. Okay, otherwise it's just sitting there.
Yeah.
But it will die at the end of this session, so you'll have to start over next year.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I hope
Thank you all.
you're doing all right in the snow. A lot of hills over there.
Yes.
Uh,
Travel safe, everyone. Bye.
Okay, thank you. Okay, committee. And now. Kirby is here. Yesterday, we start going through the tax proposals with a little more detail. So we are not taking up Medicaid, Dr. Dinosaur in here, he's in healthcare. But there's a tax attached. And Kirby, could you draft us something for extending that abatement? I think it's just changing the date. From April 15th to maybe, I don't know, when, I was thinking October 15th. But maybe November 15th, that should give everybody time to get their act done. I mean, it's pretty much a flip coin from the towns, they just need more time.
Okay, November 15th.
Yeah. That's, yeah, just change April 15th to November 15th and we'll find some place to stick it, or, well, first we'll vote on it and see if everybody agrees, and then we'll find some place to put it.
Okay, the committee amendment?
Yeah.
Okay.
Love the way the house does things with the Zorro mark and the ready.
You should all have a paper copy of this.
Yeah, it all have it.
From yesterday.
We don't do that, but the Zorro,
No.
This is, I think this is the official.
Official strike through, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, because we use the changed
the
one now.
unofficial,
That's all right.
you know, the Senate and the House would have both of those, you know, so that's. We're just happen to be looking at the official, which is has the markings on it. So Kirby Keelan to the council.
Okay.
So as a reminder of what we're looking at language that's from two different bills that were recently passed out of the House. H 721, which is an act relating to expanding access to Medicaid and Dr. Dinosaur. And then H 880 has the same exact revenue provisions, which is an act relating to, I think, appropriation for judiciary.
Oh, that was the, that was the changing the date or the title for something we did last year. It was more of a technical correction for the victim service.
The H 880, I actually don't have that in front of me right now, but it's to pay for a lot of things the judiciary has requested. It's the judiciary's
Okay,
bill, which Jim Harvey wrote the appropriation judiciary side of that. I just wrote the revenue.
okay,
Couple reasons why this language is in both bills and why these revenue provisions are in both bills. One is that the House packaged that together because these revenue provisions all add up to an amount of revenue to pay for all of the things in the two bills. So the revenue pays for both bills. Well, that's really the main reason.
Yeah.
Why they do it that way.
this is not the way they usually do.
Right.
So we will just do the tax Well, I think. So we'll have to have Jen come in and do Dr. Downey's exception.
Right, so Jim Carvey would be the legislative counsel for both of these bills for the policy sides and not the revenue side. So getting to the revenue provisions, so we have to be looking at H 721, again, it's the same for 880.
Are the taxes in both bills?
It's the same,
The same taxes? in
it's the
both
same
bills?
tax changes in both bills.
Huh.
The first change is under the corporate income tax, the Vermont corporate income tax.
So, sorry, which bill are you on?
We're on 721
All right.
and it
It's
looks
a big,
like
big bill.
page
On
41.
that,
So we're just looking at the last few pages of the bill. So it's pages 41 through 44 is what we're gonna be looking at.
And I think we can just see that these are good programs that would be of value.
Yes, the rest of the bill is the programs that this revenue is ostensibly paying for. So, okay, to get into the corporate income tax revenue. This change we're looking at here is to add back 2 corporate income tax deductions that are available at the federal level. One of them is for something called foreign derived intangible income. That is when you have a US corporation that owns some intellectual property rights, let's say the rights to a character. And then they get income from those rights by making goods and selling them overseas. So, action figures, character,
Yeah.
whatever is made, sold into, say, Europe. Then that particular type of income at the federal level is given a tax deduction. With the policy reasoning behind that tax deduction at the federal level is to try to reward these companies for holding their intellectual property in the US. There's a kind of a flip side deduction that's also being added back here, which is something called global intangible low tax income. The acronym is GILTI, which Congress did on purpose to shame. This was created, the whole concept of this was created, the California Jobs Act. And in this case, GILTI income is when it's like the opposite of what I said before, in a way. It's intangible property that's held by a controlled foreign corporation, that is, corporations in another country, but it has 50% ownership or more from a US, or a US company has 50% ownership of that foreign company, right? So it's foreign controlled corporation that has intellectual property. And in that case, the income that's the IRS does a formula to say that foreign corporation receives X amount from intangibles, from income derived from intangibles like intellectual property rights, characters, whatever. We're gonna say, like, again, it's a formula, so it's not exact, but the IRS says we deem that you make this much from this intangible property, and we're gonna tax it. So it was a way to try to punish that type of behavior. But they didn't want to fully punish it. They don't apply the full federal income tax, corporate income tax rate to it. There's a deduction. So that's what this deduction is. So currently Vermont, because it flows through, Vermont does tax this GILTI income, but because it flows through, Vermont's allowing this deduction as well. So for both of these federal corporate income tax deductions that relate to intellectual property and foreign income, what this would do is to tax it at 100% with the Vermont rate. And as a reminder to the committee, the way corporate income tax is paid in Vermont is it's based off of sales into Vermont from any US corporation. So there's not really a relationship between corporate income tax that we're talking about and Vermont corporations, because it's entirely possible that Vermont corporation does not make sales into Vermont and doesn't pay Vermont income tax or corporate income tax. So this is really about these changes go to US companies who sell into Vermont. and not allowing these, deductions that are related to foreign income. So that's the one, and that's definitely the most complicated thing I think I'm be talking about on here. Like both stuff.
Can you just say again, as I look at the fiscal summary, is that subpart F or the increase in the corporate tax rate?
That's, under federal law, these deductions are in the part of federal law, also part of that. So if you see a reference to subpart F, it's talking about what it's like.
So we don't have to call it guilty if we don't want to, but that's what that is.
Yes, I mean, just the two deductions specifically are deductions for FDII and guilty. But sometimes they can just be referred to together as subpart F because again, that's where it's located.
Is anybody articulate why we want to do this?
It's in a, well, the conversation started in the House about changing from Water's Edge reporting to worldwide reporting. To try to base Vermont tax off of income from corporations worldwide. And kind of decoupling from the way that it's done at the federal level. And there were going to be a lot of complications with that. The administration of it was going to be difficult. And what was discovered was a lot of that foreign income that you would have gotten at with the worldwide reporting this is a big part of it. This income. So a much simpler, much easier to administer kind of way of going about getting at least part of that foreign income that could have been taxed if we go to worldwide reporting is captured here. So the House didn't do fully what it maybe was thinking about or setting out to do with the worldwide reporting and decided to go the easier route and try to get some income from foreign corporations this way.
Was there any discussion or about equity, about does this make sense to do, or is this just simply a source of where we can get some money? You know anything about the testimony that was
there was quite a bit of testimony. Again, a lot of the testimony was about worldwide reporting and what corporations do to move income overseas, to move assets overseas, and so there was interest based on that testimony to try to tax that.
Is this pattern on something that's done anywhere else in the US?
There are other states that do and do not tax the FDII. There's states that do or do not tax guilty income. I think Vermont would be the first state to not allow any deduction for the guilty income.
You not tax something called guilty income.
So again, Vermont taxes it just doesn't tax it at 100% since it's allowing this federal deduction. Yeah. There's not any state that does worldwide reporting.
That's going to be talking about gaining here. Do you have any ideas?
I don't have the JFO fiscal note.
It's just at the subpart F,
Yes,
it's nothing in FY 25. It's,
because it's not in effect yet.
right, it's 15 million the following 2 years.
Security registration fee is 6.2. That one I want to look at because we just raised that like 2 years ago.
Yeah, so there's 3 changes for these bills. That was the first one. The second one is increase of the top corporate marginal rate from 8.5% to 10%. Pretty straightforward. It does put Vermont at more or less the top for corporate tax rates. And the final change is with the increases for filing fees for securities. There's 2 different fees that are being increased. One is for hedge funds, basically, and some other types of investment companies. That's an increase from 600 to 640. My understanding is that fee has not been increased for several years.
Okay.
But the other fee, the one that's paid by mostly mutual funds, was updated in 2022, and it was increased to 2,000 for initial notice filing fee. And it was increased up to 1,650 for the renewal fee. And now this is going to further change that by adding 250 to each of those.
Okay.
That's those
That's it.
bills.
I'm just looking at something that says corporations are expected to increase their estimated payments in response to expected increased tax liability for the corporate income tax. Is that, I'm trying to understand if they heard about some unintended consequences to these bills. I don't understand what that means.
Well, for one thing, the corporate changes, because different corporations file on different timelines. Even though it's not effective until next year. Some of that revenue would come in early, and I think that might be what you're referring to there.
Okay,
That there'd be some corporate income coming in earlier, a little bit of it coming in earlier than
Okay.
expected. But I'm not aware, I mean, this is the JFO area for what they bake into their estimates.
I see, so it's just quarterly estimated tax payment.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think that's what that is a reference to, but that's for JFO to talk
Right.
about any of the estimates.
yeah,
Can I ask a question, Chair Cummings?
yeah,
So Kirby, I'm trying to rationalize the guilty and the FDLIC. I got the acronym wrong. I have a general idea of how this will affect people selling into Vermont, these large organizations. But is there a way to put to crystallize which companies will likely be the ones paying this as an example set for me to better understand how they might, if they wanted to, transfer that additional Vermont specific tax burden onto Vermont consumers when they're selling into the state? I'm just trying to understand who this will likely impact with example companies. Is that a fair question?
Sure. As far as transferring anything to Vermont, I mean, I don't think so, because these are going to be US corporations that sell into Vermont. Would they change, like what they would have to do, I suppose, is change how much they're charging specifically to Vermonters for their products or services? I don't think that that's kind of like, that's like the thinking or the way that the prices are modeled. Who would be affected would be corporations, any US corporation, again, that's the group we're talking about. Any US corporation that either owns controlled foreign corporations or that sells into overseas markets, especially using intellectual property. The majority of the taxpayers affected, I think it's safe to say, are not corporations located in Vermont.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'd like clarity if we're talking about like Disney or like Comcast or whoever, MSNB or the NBC conglomerates. Is it those types of companies and the revenue?
It would be those.
Okay.
Yeah.
can I need to better understand. Any corporation operating in the US has to pay Vermont, or could they stop doing business in Vermont? Like, we've had a lot of insurance companies just drop their Vermont book of business because they don't feel like dealing with our small state.
That's possible. I've never heard of that happening.
Okay,
But yes, I mean, technically, if a corporation stopped making sales into Vermont, then it would no longer need to file Vermont corporate income tax.
okay, so it's probably a very small subset of corporations that would
There would be a
stop
tax.
doing business in Vermont.
Oh, I don't think that there would be any.
Okay,
Based purely on just this amount of tax.
okay,
It's a reminder, so the way that corporate income tax is paid is, you look at all of the corporate income everywhere. And then you allocate based on Vermont sales, which is going to be a crumb of that, and then Vermont just taxes that crumb.
And they're okay like leaving this crumb here. I mean, why haven't other states done this? Do you think? Like, I don't know if you'd ask.
Well, when we did this, we went through all the states that had switched from whatever we switched from to whatever, one was Kimby? No. Just the different ways of taxing when we made that switch,
It was, yeah, in the last few years is
Yeah.
when we switched to just the sales factor.
right?
Before that, then Vermont income tax or corporate income tax was based partially on property owned in Vermont and payroll in Vermont.
Mm-hmm.
And Vermont doesn't do that anymore. It's
Mhm.
based entirely off of sales in Vermont.
Okay.
So the corporate income tax burden shifted from corporations located here to
Yeah.
corporations making sales in the year.
That one, it was Quinlan Moran.
Hmm.
There were two forms, ways of taxing. One was what we did. And the other is what we went to, and I'm not remembering.
Single sales factor is what's called.
Yeah,
that we went to.
but they had names. One was Quinlan and
Oh.
one was.
That's related, yeah.
It was a case or something that had said this was an acceptable way to do it.
But it's like, do we see other states looking at this, or is it not advantageous for other states? The same way it is for Vermont?
It was,
I think it's political decisions from state to state,
Okay,
like how much. Where they want to tax, where they want to get taxed from.
yeah,
Like I said, some states choose to tax this, some states choose not to.
mm-hmm,
And try to, base their tax bases off of other areas.
mm-hmm,
when we went, it was a significant number that did the sales in. It's one of those growing areas that more and more
Yeah.
states were going to. We are not an outlier.
I mean, I'm
In
surprised,
this particular
yeah.
tax, we might be an outlier.
Right, but is there any? I'm trying to find the downside, like we're taxing really large corporations that make sales in Vermont, they're not likely to change their behavior. Are we okay, like, who do we need to hear from that's gonna oppose this, I guess, or? Sucks.
People who are opposed to corporation paying taxes, I mean,
Okay.
We're having the tax foundation come in.
Oh, okay, so
So if
it's like-
anybody is opposed, we
Grover
will
Norquist.
hear from that news. He's got a date coming up. Right?
Weeks away. is what
Weeks
you know.
away.
Oh,
yes.
okay.
They emailed me, constituent did, and said they didn't hear both sides of the story in the House. We didn't try and hear both sides, so we will.
A
A
constituent, so,
constituent who has found this person at the tax foundation,
okay,
who is an expert, and we'll talk to them.
but the constituent isn't directly impacted.
Not that I know.
Okay.
I don't think somebody from Northfield owns an international corporation.
If we do, interesting.
So at least for the FDII part of it.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, you're asking for policy reasons, as I understand it, the policy reason at the federal level to have a deduction for that is again to encourage US corporations to hold their intellectual property in the US.
Okay,
As
so
opposed to hiding it in
federally,
that state.
federally they have some,
So it's to
Deduction
try,
that matters
to try
to
to
them.
encourage behavior that
okay,
Congress wants to see out of corporations.
okay.
Whether Vermont making this change is going to affect the behavior of corporations is a policy question for you.
Or who knows?
So we will hear from the tax foundation, I'm sure they will tell us what they say.
Well, I've been in contact with the tax foundation,
That's-
not necessarily on this subject, but it may be a derivative of this.
Okay,
One of the things I think about when I think about intellectual property, and I've got to think through it, but we have one of the largest consulting firms on intellectual property that is in fact headquartered in Vermont. They do a lot of consulting for Fortune 500 companies, particularly in intellectual property
We
development.
also have the highest number of patents per capita.
Yeah.
In Vermont, so I don't know if. it-
So I don't know if
Action
there's any
changes.
implication there. I haven't thought through that.
well, I was thinking we have a lot of just entertainment, intellectual property for growing our tech area, our medical science, research is growing at UVM. We might wanna think about impact on Anyone who owns it, and if they are holding it as a corporation sees.
So the effective dates for the securities fees would be effective July first of this year, and the corporate income tax changes, including the rate and the deductions, would take effect January first of next year, and then would mostly be the filings done in 2026 would be where the
So-
income starts.
One more time, guilty and FDII are two separate things that both make up subpart F. And
Mhm.
guilt and FDII is the intellectual property.
They don't make up subpart F, that's where they're located.
That's where there's other things in subpart F.
Mhm.
So are we tackling all of subpart F or just these two things in subpart F?
These are the deductions for subpart F,
Okay.
subpart F relates to foreign income,
Okay,
and these are
okay.
the two deductions.
So one is intellectual property and the other is something else?
They're both related to intellectual property, but one of them is about US corporations holding intellectual property and making sales overseas, and the other one is about intellectual property that's held overseas by a controlled foreign corporation.
Okay, so we will hear more about this. We're here for the tax foundation. I was thinking, the gentleman from the, Mr. Kuchar, that was in this morning. But
So you Vermont Technology Alliance?
Alliance, they might be interested in this.
Yeah.
Again, I have been told that at some point across the hall will tell us how much money they
Right,
need to
right.
keep us
Yeah,
alive and not do new programs.
right.
Okay, and these are.
This is a free source of revenue for the general
This is a
fund.
source of revenue. The House has attached it to bills.
Mm-hmm,
I'm sure these proposals will come over.
mm-hmm,
They will come to Health and Welfare. Health and Welfare is gonna do what they do to them and send them to a PROS. If PROS decides to fund it, then they will tell us to move. Okay, these are some ways. I know they have done a lot of work on the corporate income tax,
the house,
the House.
yeah, these are very specific.
And we did a whole new structure. We went from inventory and payroll to sales, which did benefit the few corporations Vermont has. And apparently these are a few things we might squeeze a little harder on, so. Okay. we got
So-
another one.
If the committee, if the chair, if you thought we had time, I
Yeah.
could go into HA 29, which is the other bill involving revenues, so it's
Sure.
just passed out. This is the one that relates to personal income tax and property transfer tax. Unfortunately, we don't, the House Clerk's Office has not released, as passed by the House version, so what we're looking at is a floor amendment, that was part of it. Which includes a lot of the changes, but I'll just try to give you an overview. I think for the property transfer tax, actually, instead of looking at this, it might be, I did prepare a chart to compare the, so I think you would. This is-
Which, yeah, no, tell us what bill that is, number.
829, it's this, it has a lot of things in it.
Is it the housing number?
It's the housing bill, yeah.
Okay, so again, you have this chart that I threw together today because yesterday I heard interest in comparing this
Okay,
311 to H 29 and the property transfer tax changes. So under current law, so we have a place to start. The property transfer tax is imposed at a rate of 1.25% on transfers of properties. The buyer pays it. Principal residences are taxed at 0.5% for the first $100,000 of value, and then the 1.25 kicks in after that. And then there's a rate of 0% for the first $110,000 of value if the purchaser is using a mortgage funded using VHCB, VHFA, and USDA rural development funds. That's a very small amount of transfers. I just want to make that clear. The last major change to this, which is something that I personally discovered when working on this in the House, was 1988. That's when the rate changed from 1 to 1.25. And when the threshold amounts that were that are taxed at a lower rate, when they were added. So
Yeah.
these rates have not, they've been where they are since 1988.
Senator Sorokin and I worked really hard on him to raise that to 200. Because that was a very low price in the House of Mines.
Yeah.
We thought it should be raised, but we failed. That was when clean water surcharge went on.
Okay.
So that only new people get charged for putting phosphate in the water. I can put a whole fertilizer, I won't.
So also under current law, the property transfer tax revenue is allocated like this. 2.5 million to the VHCB's bond that it has, right? Then 2% to PBR for administration, and then what's left from there, 50% goes to the trust fund. This is the VHCB trust fund. 17% to municipal and regional planning fund, and then 33% to the general fund. And that's relevant if both of these bills change aspects of that.
So, okay, yeah. You could have a house worth $800,000 that receives the 0.5% rate for the first $200,000 and then gets taxed at the 3.65% rate for the last 50,000.
Yes, and I mean, I would defer to JFO on the math there, but around that amount.
Yeah.
Is kind of a break-even point
Okay.
for a house. So it would have to be more expensive than that, I think, to actually pay more under HA 29.
Okay, so between 750 to 800,000, you're still overall paying less
Because
because
of
you're getting
the,
the first break.
because of the 0.5% is on the first 200,000 instead of the first 100,000. Put a different way, under HA 29, if you're buying a principal residence, you're actually going to pay less tax than current law, up to a value of around 770, 780, something like that. And at which point the excess amount starts being taxed. So, or maybe even up to 800, again, for jail.
Something like that. Okay, interesting.
So that's HA 29 when it comes to principal residences. It has this, it also increases up to 200,000, the threshold for the subsidized portions that we talked about. S 311 increases the threshold for just the subsidized ones, not all principal residences, but just those principal residences that are subsidized, the mortgages we talked about. And that threshold is being increased to 150. So
But sorry.
yeah,
They're also using a measure of what a principal residence is for the tax break.
it's current law, that's current law.
Okay,
The principal residence lower rate,
yeah,
it's based off of the definition used for the land gains tax.
okay,
Current law,
okay.
this is just,
They didn't,
so for the
Right.
top row here,
Yeah.
S 311 and HA 29, they're both using the thresholds that are in current law. It's just HA 29 is applying the new threshold to all principal residences. So it's more generous there, it costs more, but then as we get down to the
but
changes.
then is a house that's going to be used as a residential rental not included in that?
Something that is going to be used as a rental would not receive the lower rate from the principal residence.
Okay,
So it would pay the same as under current law up to a value of 750.
those are the ones that are gonna cost $1 million and then,
And then the amount over 750 would be taxed at a higher rate. than current law.
So they don't get a tax break.
No, under current law and
Yeah.
under this, neither one.
Right,
would-
well, I just wanna say, to be clear, ours does give the same benefit of getting out of the tax increase to use of property as residential
Okay.
rental.
Kirby, it would
Yes.
be helpful if at some point we could put current law on there,
Okay,
because it's hard.
yeah, I know, I put it at the top here, but,
Okay.
but I
Alright.
understand. Okay, so we understand the thresholds and the differences, that in a nutshell, HA 29 is more generous with the thresholds, but S 311 does have the same concept, just not with the, not to the same extent. The other big difference between the bills is HA 29, we've already talked about, it has basically this new marginal rate. So for value over 750,000, the tax rate starts to be 3.65% as opposed to 1.25. Under S 311, it's not a new marginal rate, it's not that concept. It's a higher rate for a specific category of transfers. Those transfers that are residences, but not principal residences, and that will not be used for long-term rentals. So it's a way of trying to get at second homes. Residences that look like they're going to be second homes would have twice the rate. Instead of 1.25%, it would be 2.5.
Can I get a clarifying point here, Chair Cummings?
Yeah,
I just,
well, I'm reading the chart, I don't see you up there in the corner.
oh, good. I just want to be clear that the HA 29 causes me concern, if I'm understanding it correctly from Senator Ram Hinsdale's last question. This would apply to all properties, be it commercial, be it a huge apartment complex that we desperately need in certain areas. They would pay the 3.65% because those large buildings, if they're being sold to somebody that's going to manage that apartment complex, would pay the 3.65% on that $3 million or $10 million apartment complex. Is that correct?
Not on, it's marginal, so they would pay the higher rate on the value in excess of 750,000.
Right, but a multifamily home is the most likely to cost over 750,000 besides a second home.
That's
You
very
don't have to
concerning.
answer that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or a commercial building,
it
right, so
also,
this.
I think it might depend on the market as well.
So I like S311 language much more for whatever that's worth, and I'm really worried that we're going to add the 3.65% property transfer tax, which will be huge amounts for that housing we desperately need on those large multi-unit housing complexes. So that's concerning to me.
I think this proposal should cease to be discussed, frankly, the most to me.
We're gonna hear all the options, and then we will decide what we will discuss.
So.
Maybe we won't discuss any of it.
So are there any more questions about there's the two different ways of treating the rate. One's targeted at second homes at 2.5%. The other's targeted at just any property that's more valuable than 750,000.
And they don't say residential, okay.
And
And we're, right now, we do the same property transfer for commercial as for residential.
principal residences pay a little less because of the thresholds we talked
Okay.
about under current law. All other transfers 1.25%.
So we don't treat commercial separately at this point.
No, and neither would the HA 29.
But
And neither would S 311.
But we don't increase the tax on commercial properties.
yeah, we,
No, we don't,
When you say we, you mean S 311.
yes,
S 311, no, it's residential properties
it's residential properties using.
that are going to be second homes.
right,
So S 311 is 1.25% rate on commercial properties. Current law is 1.25% on commercial properties. H 529 is 1.25% on commercial properties up to the value of 750,000. In which case the value starts getting taxed at 3.65% in excess of that. Okay. I'm gonna skip allocations for a second and just point out that the JFO estimates we have at this point for the S 311 changes, it's approximately 13 to 14 million in revenue. Ted told me today that he is working on refining that a bit. That's why I included subject to revision here. Because he wants to make sure that he's getting that right. And then, for H29, the revenue expected is 17.5 million. This is for next fiscal year, of course, it's not, it's gonna change year to year. So H8, when it comes to the revenue, H829 produces quite a bit more revenue, but it also costs more because of those threshold changes for the principal residences, for the tax relief that's given to principal residences that are under 750,000. That's more expensive, so the overall revenue is decreased by that. S311 produces less revenue, but it also spends less revenue because the tax relief there is for just that subset of principal residences that are using.
Just so I fully understand. Is that okay, Madam Chair? Yeah. If you buy a multifamily home and you live in it, you receive the full tax rate. Or no, that's still considered a commercial building that's owner occupied, or do you only receive it for the portion that you're living in?
I would want to go back and check, but my understanding is that if you're buying a property that has multiple units, but one of those units is going to be occupied by the purchaser as the principal residence, then the lower rate can be used.
For the whole building?
I believe so, but I can.
You should check on that.
I could check on that.
And that hasn't been my understanding.
That doesn't mean you understand.
But maybe I'm wrong, or maybe things have changed.
It's still a commercial building and you get to claim a percent as your primary residence or your homestead.
So
Same with-
these things,
Yeah.
so the real world actually gets quite complicated when it comes to real estate, right? For instance, there's commercially, well, of course, an apartment complex with many units, 10 units is going to be considered commercial. But there can be other scenarios where I think I heard Chair Cummings say earlier today that the tax department had a discussion with you about how farms are considered commercial on the grand list, even though there's a principal residence there on the farm. And so there's these categories of what's residential or not for the grand list don't always match up with whether or not that's actually someone's principal residence.
No, I get it. I'm just really curious about this particular scenario because there's money out there federally to try and create owner occupied multifamily housing. And from what I'm seeing, if I'm understanding correctly, that could be detrimental even if it's owner occupied.
What's detrimental?
The increase in the tax rate.
Well, yes, on a commercial building, you're going to be taxing it at 3.65.
I didn't know there's a difference if it's owner occupied and I just like you to find that out.
Yeah, I understand.
I have a feeling they probably didn't think that one through.
I think that it probably would, that you could use the principal residence rate for that. But I have to look at how the tax department sees it. Okay, so the allocations, there's some just slight differences. S311 does allocate 2 million of property transfer tax revenues, the Act 250 permit fund, that's new. That's not part of the current law allocations. For the additional revenue that's produced by S311, 70% goes to VHCB's trust fund and 30% goes to municipal and regional planning fund. Under the House version, because this is in that housing bill, all of this revenue is being appropriated for housing for fiscal year 25. But the statutory allocations are changed so that the expected additional revenue would go to the VHCB trust fund and to the general fund, and that the amount of allocation and funding that the municipal regional planning fund receives would stay the same as current law, essentially. The percentage will drop, but it will be a smaller percentage of more revenue, so the funding itself will stay the same.
Okay, So they're funding with the housing. Interesting. Okay,
So those are the property transfer tax changes. There's a clean water surcharge change because those thresholds that we were talking about, the 200,000 threshold that's being changed for H829. They're extending that to the clean water surcharge as well. Under current law, 0%. There's a 0% surcharge in the first 100,000 of value for principal residents. That's being increased to 200, but since that's being increased, it creates less revenue for the clean water fund. So to make up for that, the clean water surcharge rate is being increased from 0.2 to 0.22.
I need to have a higher rate to produce the same amount of money. Because they're lowering the property, is it 0.02 of the property transfer tax goes? It's an additional fee, right?
I think that this a succinct way to put it would be the rate is going up by 0.02, but for principal residences, you could end up paying less surcharge if it's if the value isn't that is, I don't know, maybe the estimating off the top of my head, like if it's a principal residence that's around 400,000, something like that, then you would pay the same or less surcharge under this change. For values more than that, then you could end up paying more surcharge than current law.
Is the surcharge based on the price of the house or on the property transfer tax? It's on the price.
It's on the value of the property being transferred, so it's the same tax base as the property transfer tax.
Okay. So why do we have to raise it?
Because they again, just like with the property transfer tax, the surcharge is a lower rate, but in this case, 0 on the first 100,000 of value. They increased that to 200,000.
Okay, so they decrease the number of properties or the amount. They increased the amount of money that you had to spend before you got charged. So they needed to raise the rate to make the same amount of money.
So it's beneficial for, say, moderately
Price.
valued principal residences, and then it's going to be higher for others.
Okay.
But it's revenue neutral overall, just that change itself.
Do we know where we stand nationwide in property transfer tax? That must be a JFO.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm actually
Maybe
looking up.
we could ask the JFO if they could tell us, well. Yeah, they could tell us where we rank in property transfer tax.
I'm not even sure how many states have it.
That is also true. Maybe we are an outlier.
I mean, there's some states have things like mortgage recording fees and things like that Vermont doesn't have, so.
Well, in other places, they have a very different closing thing. You just send it to a business that calculates all the values and all the. There's no realtors and people and bankers sitting at the table.
So another change that's in here, and I'm sorry that we don't have the as passed the House version, because it makes it easier to keep track of all this. So I'm bouncing off of different amendments at this point.
As passed by House version, and Kathleen did bring down.
Oh, I think they haven't released it yet.
Then, yeah, they have,
They have. It's not.
the house clerk hasn't.
Okay.
Um, but, so another change that's in here though is, the House took the administration's proposal for,
This
the
thing looks
property.
like a budget.
There is budget language.
Yeah,
There is budget language.
436,000 to the Agency of Digital Services.
There's budget language, there's the property transfer tax allocation portion of the budget is in this bill. Because JFO needed that to be in there in order to do the estimates that they do. Because they would have otherwise had to base their estimates off of the statutory allocations. Which is not what they're doing, it's the allocations are for housing entirely here. So in order for JFO to have an accurate
So
fiscal
if
note,
we are doing it for housing, the numbers probably aren't, okay. So keep looking at it.
yeah, so the budget language is in here, of course, the same language is gonna be in the budget and.
Oh, it is in the budget? This is in the House budget?
Yes.
Okay, so
No, not the whole thing, just that language that you're looking at.
the 436?
Yes, this up here. Let me be clear.
Okay, so that came over in the
It's
budget.
it's just the section on property transfer tax allocation.
Okay.
This 24A. Is a section that's in the budget also, just
Okay,
that,
okay.
that's the only thing. Okay, and so if this stays. Then we'll have to make sure it matches the budget later, which is something that I and JFO and we all have to keep track of.
Well, the budget is being very clear that they are determining what gets allocated, not the tax department, the tax committees.
Right, this came from House Appropriations, didn't come from Waste and Means.
Oh, this came from appropriations.
That budget language did.
Okay, good.
But this bill does overall have like $130 million of spending in it
Yes.
that isn't accounted for right now in the budget. Somewhat, there's
So,
some profit.
so how it's accounted for are the revenue sections of this
Right,
bill.
but the revenue sections are not in the budget as it came from the House.
I believe that's correct.
Yeah, the Medicaid, the housing, that money is not in the House budget. And so it's not in the budget, our committees.
So some of the other things that are in here. There's the property transfer tax exemption that the administration proposed. I believe you've heard the Department of Tax talk about it. It was for blighted properties, transfers of blighted properties. It was expected, I think, the revenue, or the cost was expected to be about 400,000. The House, altered that to, instead of it being applying to blighted properties, it would be abandoned properties. And that definition of abandoned is, the same definition the administration proposed for blighted. But it also included, the requirements that the, dwelling is real estate owned by a municipality and acquired through condemnation or a tax sale. The reason why that is that those would be the cases in which you would have a property in which the owner is unknown, so it would be abandoned. That's over inclusive those because you could have a tax sale or condemnation and have the owner known. So this is more of a term in art than a strict definition of abandoned. But it was putting some more qualifiers on that the blighted definition. And I think part of that relates to a desire to not have the term blighted in something that the General Assembly is seems to be judgmental about. So they prefer to ban. There's another property transfer tax exemption, you'll see that on the screen here. That is for transfers of new mobile homes as the term is defined under Title 10. And that has label evidencing greater energy efficiency under the Federal Energy Star program. background here is property transfer tax only applies to mobile homes if they are installed into the ground and fix the property, which is not likely to happen with a new mobile home, which is what this is for. So this is most likely to only apply to mobile homes that are purchased using a mortgage and therefore have to have a warranty or deed accompany them, and then they're considered real property in that case. So I don't think that there's even a JFO estimate because it's a very small impact.
Might be like 20. Right. Something like that, especially like at a fix to the ground. Yeah, I was being sure.
So-
Well, affixed to the ground, are we talking tie downs, which is, or
Like-
are we talking, you've got to have a foundation set it on it, because I've seen both.
The Department of Taxes makes a decision about whether it applies, and they look at several things like, have you taken the wheels off? Is it plugged up to utilities? Have you built a little structure or porch around it? That kind of stuff,
Yeah. That's,
to see if it's become real. But again, if that's all that stuff's been done, then it's not a new mobile home and it wouldn't be able to use this extension.
okay. We got
Um,
more important fish to fry.
So, okay, so we have that, and then there's also a change to personal income tax. I'm not sure if I have that on this first, here, just a minute.
Okay, I have a feeling we can probably go with personal income tax another day.
Okay.
I think there's enough tax floating around here that we need some time. I'm going to
Okay.
need some time to figure out what's happening in the property transfer tax.
Okay,
So we will start with the income tax on another day.
okay, and by then we'll have
We'll have.
the whole bill pretty well have.
Yeah, we're done, I guess, unless you all want to talk about telephone.
I'm gonna go play Nanook of the North.
Okay. Well, Nanook, of course, the snow off your cows.
I gotta get going, because, I gotta get home in time to turn around and come back.
I know, I feel.
Stay in town.
And
I gotta get